You learnt to read the room before you could read yourself. There was a moment in your childhood, perhaps so small you barely remember it, when you made a decision that would shape the rest of your life. It was not a conscious choice, it was an instinct, a survival mechanism that whispered, if I'm quiet enough, if I take up less space, if I learn to disappear into the background, then maybe I will be safe. Maybe I will not be the target. Maybe I will not be the reason everything falls apart. And it worked. Your silence became your shield. Your stillness became your strategy. You watched, you listened, you absorbed the emotional temperature of every room you entered, and you adjusted yourself accordingly. You became fluent in the language of other people's moods, learning to predict anger before it erupted, to sense disappointment before it was voiced, to manage the emotions of those around you with a precision that most adults never master. But here is the paradox that no one tells you about survival strategies. The very thing that protects you in childhood becomes the thing that quietly suffocates you in adulthood. The silence that once kept you safe now keeps you small. The invisibility that once shielded you from harm now prevents anyone from truly seeing you. The hypervigilance that helped you navigate chaos has become the lens through which you view every interaction, every relationship, every possibility for connection. You have spent so long being the calm in someone else's storm that you forgot you were allowed to have weather of your own. You learnt to exist as a response to other people's needs, rather than as a person with needs of your own. And now, years later, you find yourself in a strange prison, one without bars, without guards, but one you have built so carefully around yourself that you no longer remember what it feels like to speak without calculation, to exist without apologizing, to take up space without guilt. This is the psychology of a child who survives by staying quiet, and this is your warning. What saved you then is destroying you now. To understand how silence becomes identity, we must first understand the process of what psychologists call emotional parentification. This occurs when a child assumes the role of emotional regulator within a dysfunctional family system, becoming responsible for managing the feelings, conflicts, and psychological stability of adults who should be caring for them. The child does not choose this role. The child adapts to it because the alternative, chaos or abandonment or violence, is far more terrifying than the exhaustion of constant vigilance. Imagine a young nervous system, still developing, still learning how to interpret the world. This system is designed to learn safety from caregivers, to develop what attachment theorists call a secure base from which to explore the world. But when that base is unstable, when home is a place of unpredictability rather than security, the child's nervous system recalibrates. It shifts from a state of social engagement into what Dr. Stephen Porges calls a chronic dorsal vagal shutdown, a biological state where the body learns that the safest response to threat is not fight or flight, but freeze, disappear, become invisible. This is not a choice, this is neurobiology. The child who stays quiet is not weak. They are adapting to an environment where visibility equals vulnerability. They are developing what researchers in trauma psychology call hypervigilance with suppression. A state where the mind is constantly scanning for danger, while simultaneously training the body not to react, not to express, not to reveal the internal storm. Consider also the concept of the default mode network, the brain's introspective circuitry that activates when we are not focused on external tasks. In children who survive through silence, this network becomes overdeveloped, creating what we might call an introspective prison. These children spend extraordinary amounts of time in internal reflection, analysing their own behaviour, predicting outcomes, running simulations of social interactions before they happen. They become experts in other people's psychology while remaining strangers to their own authentic desires. The philosopher and psychologist Carl Jung spoke of the shadow, those aspects of ourselves we repress because they are unacceptable to our environment. For the quiet child, the shadow is not darkness. The shadow is volume. The shadow is need. The shadow is the part of them that wants to scream, to demand, to take up space without permission. And so they learn what psychologists call emotion dysregulation through suppression. Not the inability to feel emotions, but the compulsive habit of feeling them in secret, processing them alone, never allowing them to become visible or burdensome to others. This creates what schema therapy identifies as an emotional deprivation schema, a core belief that one's emotional needs are not important, that asking for support is dangerous, that vulnerability is a weakness to be managed, rather than a human experience to be shared. The quiet child internalizes a devastating equation. My safety depends on my silence. Therefore, my existence depends on my erasure. But what's the cost of silence anyway? It costs you your voice. Not literally, of course. You can still speak. But there is a difference between making sounds and being heard. There is a difference between answering questions and expressing truth. The child who learns to survive through silence grows into an adult who can fill a room with words while saying absolutely nothing about what they actually feel, what they actually need, what they actually fear. You become a master of the performance of okayness. You learn to smile at precisely the right moments. You learn to nod, to agree, to accommodate, to bend yourself into whatever shape makes other people comfortable. And in doing so, you lose touch with the architecture of your own desires. You become so skilled at reading what other people want from you that you forget to ask what you want for yourself. Seneca once wrote, "We suffer more often in our imagination than in reality." But for the hypervigilant child turned adult, imagination is not separate from reality. It is the constant simulation of worst-case scenarios, the endless rehearsal of conversations that might go wrong, the anticipatory grief of relationships that have not yet ended, but surely will, because how could anyone love what they cannot see? How could anyone choose you when you have spent your entire life teaching them that you do not need to be chosen? This is the existential weight of learned silence. You become invisible not just to others, but to yourself. Your own emotions become foreign, confusing, threatening. When you do feel something strongly, anger or sadness or even joy, it arrives with a crushing sense of guilt, as though you have violated some unspoken contract. You have spent so long being the person who does not cause problems that the moment you have needs, express boundaries, or simply take up emotional space, you experience what psychologists call maladaptive guilt, the feeling that your existence is inherently burdensome. You might find yourself apologizing constantly, not just for mistakes, but for existing, for speaking, for needing, for feeling. You apologize for taking up time in a conversation. You apologize for asking questions. You apologize for being upset, even when someone has genuinely harmed you. Because somewhere deep in your heart, a child still echoes, "If you are too much, you will be abandoned. If you are not quiet, you will not be safe." The philosopher Rainer Maria Rilke understood this kind of silence when he wrote about the unsaid. He recognized that what we do not speak does not disappear. It accumulates, it ferments. It becomes the subtext of every interaction, the weight we carry into every relationship, the invisible barrier between who we are and who we allow others to see. And so you live in a state of perpetual self-monitoring. Every social interaction becomes an examination. Did I say too much? Was I too quiet? Did I make them uncomfortable? Did I reveal too much of myself? You cannot simply be present because you are constantly evaluating your own performance of acceptable existence. You cannot relax into connection because you are always prepared for rejection, always scanning for signs that you have overstepped, always ready to retreat back into the safety of invisibility. This is the hidden sacrifice. You traded your authenticity for acceptance, your selfhood for safety. And the cruelest part is that the acceptance you receive is not even for you. It is for the carefully curated version of yourself that you have learned to perform. The real you, the one with needs and anger and desires and boundaries, remains locked away, unmet, unknown, convinced that it is fundamentally unlovable. So what does this look like in adulthood? How do these childhood patterns of survival translate into the daily experiences of life? You might find that you are exceptional at supporting others, but incapable of asking for support yourself. You are the friend everyone calls in a crisis, the colleague who stays late to help, the partner who anticipates needs before they are spoken. But when you are struggling, you withdraw, you minimize your own pain. You tell yourself that other people have it worse, that your problems are not significant enough, that you should be able to handle this alone. You have confused independence with isolation and called it strength. You might discover that you are drawn to relationships where you can remain in the helper role, where your value is defined by what you provide rather than who you are. You choose partners who are emotionally expressive, sometimes volatile, sometimes needy, because these dynamics feel familiar. You know how to navigate chaos. You know how to be needed. But what you do not know is how to be wanted for yourself, how to be chosen not for your utility, but for your presence. And so you unconsciously recreate the conditions of your childhood self, staying in relationships where you must earn love through silence, through accommodation, through the continuous management of someone else's emotional world. You might notice that in your career you are competent, reliable, often overlooked. You do not self-promote. You do not advocate for yourself. You assume that good work will be recognized without you having to draw attention to it. But this is not strategy. This is the old pattern. Stay small, stay quiet, and hope that someone notices your value without you having to claim it. You watch others with less skill and more confidence advance past you, and you tell yourself that you do not care about recognition. But underneath that rationalization is the familiar fear. If I speak up, if I assert myself, I will be punished. I will be too much. I will be cast out. You might struggle with boundaries in ways that confuse you. You say yes when you mean no. You accommodate requests that exhaust you. You allow people to take more than you want to give, and then you resent them for it, even though you never indicated that there was a limit. But how could you? Setting boundaries requires you to believe that your needs matter as much as other people's needs, and that belief was trained out of you before you could even articulate what your needs were. You might experience a profound sense of emptiness that you cannot quite explain. Your life might look functional from the outside. You maintain relationships, you fulfill responsibilities, you appear stable. But internally, there is a disconnection, a numbness, a feeling that you are going through the motions of living without actually inhabiting your own life. This is what happens when you spend decades performing a self rather than being a self. The performance becomes so automatic that you lose touch with what is real underneath it. You might find that emotional regulation is simultaneously your greatest skill and your deepest wound. You can remain calm in chaos, process complex emotions with analytical precision, help others through their most difficult moments. But when it comes to your own emotions, you either suppress them entirely, or, when they finally break through the dam you have built, they overwhelm you completely. There is no middle ground, no healthy expression, because you were never taught that emotions are information rather than threats. You were taught that feelings are problems to be managed, controlled, hidden. But here is what you must understand. These aren't just punishment traits. These are all coping mechanisms. The carefully built strategies of a child who needed to survive. And while they served you once, you need to understand that you are no longer that child. You're no longer in that environment. The danger has already passed, but your nervous system hasn't received the message. You are still operating from the old programming, still responding to threats that no longer exist, still protecting yourself from harm that is no longer inevitable. The unlearning process begins with recognition, not self-judgment, not shame for how you have survived, but simple, clear recognition that the silence that once kept you safe is now keeping you from being known, that the invisibility that once protected you is now preventing connection, that the hypervigilance that helped you navigate an unstable childhood is now making it impossible to trust the stability you have built in adulthood. This is where the concept of what I call quiet power emerges. It is the recognition that you have been powerful all along, but your power has been directed inward, used to control yourself rather than express yourself. The strength it took to stay silent in the face of chaos, the resilience it required to manage emotions alone, the intelligence necessary to become fluent in other people's psychology. These are not weaknesses. These are profound capabilities. The question now is whether you can redirect them, whether you can use that strength not to disappear, but to emerge, whether you can apply that emotional intelligence not just to understanding others, but to understanding and expressing yourself. So how do you begin to heal from a childhood that taught you to survive by staying quiet? First, you must understand that healing is not about becoming someone else. It's not about suddenly becoming loud, assertive, or comfortable with conflict. It's about reclaiming the parts of yourself that you learn to hide. It's about slowly, carefully, creating conditions where your authentic self can be expressed without the fear of punishment or abandonment. One of the most powerful therapeutic approaches for this kind of deep patterning is what Jungian analysts calls shadow work. This involves deliberately turning toward those parts of yourself that you have spent a lifetime suppressing. Not to judge them, not to fix them, but to acknowledge them. To recognize that your anger is not dangerous, your needs are not burdensome, your voice is not a weapon. Shadow work asks you to befriend the exiled parts of yourself, to understand that what you have called weakness might actually be longing. What you have called selfishness might actually be self-preservation. What you have called too much might actually be exactly enough. You must also learn sensory regulation techniques that helps the nervous system distinguish between the past and the present. Your body still responds as though you are in danger, as though silence is necessary for survival. Practices like somatic therapy, body-based mindfulness, and nervous system education can help you recognize when you are in a hypervigilant state and gently guide yourself back to a state where authentic expression feels possible. This might look like learning to notice the physical sensations that precede shutdown, learning to identify when you are performing okayness rather than experiencing it, learning to create small moments of genuine expression, even when every instinct tells you to refrain. Perhaps most importantly, you must begin the practice of choosing confidence over survival mode. Doesn't mean faking it until you make it. Rather, it means making small, deliberate choices to express yourself even when it feels unsafe. It means speaking up in a meeting even when your heart is racing. It means telling a friend that you are struggling even when you want to minimize your pain. It means making known a boundary even when you are terrified of the response. Each of these moments is a renegotiation with your inner self. Each time you express yourself authentically and the feared catastrophe doesn't occur, you provide your body with new confidence. You teach yourself that visibility does not equal vulnerability, that being known does not guarantee rejection. The psychologist and philosopher Carl Rogers offered a profound insight when he wrote, "The curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change." This is the paradox of healing from learned silence. You cannot force yourself to become different. You cannot shame yourself into speaking. You can only begin by accepting that you learned to be quiet because you needed to survive, and that learning it wasn't wrong. It was adaptive. It was intelligent. It was the best option available to you in an impossible situation. But you are no longer in that situation, and the goal now is not to be fixed, because you were never broken. The goal is to be heard again. Yes, by others, but more importantly, by yourself. To reconnect with the parts of you that's been waiting patiently in the silence for permission to exist. To slowly, carefully, build a life where you do not have to disappear in order to be safe. Where you can take up space without apology. Where your needs are not burdens but information. Where your voice is not a risk but your right. This won't happen overnight. You've spent years, perhaps decades, perfecting the art of invisibility. Unlearning that pattern will take time, patience, and compassion. There will be moments when you'd speak up and immediately want to take it back. Moments when you'd set boundaries and then apologize for it. Moments when you'd express needs and then try to convince them that you didn't really mean it, that you're fine, that you can handle it alone. That's okay. That's part of the process. Each time you notice yourself retreating, you can make a different choice. Not a perfect choice, just a slightly different one. A small step toward visibility. A quiet act of self-reclamation. If you recognized a bit of yourself in these patterns, I want you to know that you're not alone. There are many of us who learn to survive by staying quiet. Many of us who are now learning to speak up. And while the path forward isn't always clear, the direction is clear and simple. Toward authenticity, toward reconnection, toward the radical act of allowing yourself to be known. If you found some value in this exploration, consider sharing this with someone who might need to hear this. And if you want to continue this conversation, exploring more about the psychology of survival patterns and the paths towards healing, subscribe and join the community of people learning to reclaim back their voices, one careful word at a time. You used to be quiet because you had to be. Now you can speak because you choose to.